Hello, welcome to another session of our Facebook Live. My name is Dio Samuel, and as you can see, today I want to share with you 9 podcasting trends you should notice in 2017. Now, this post, what I'm sharing with you is actually inspired by podcast websites. This post is particularly written by Ramona Rise of podcast websites at podcastwebsites.com. Now, I'm going to bring this and customize it to you as members of Nigeria Podcast Network. A couple of days ago, I actually shared the post within the group, but I'm not sure you followed through, you read the post. Hey, Ayobami, welcome to this live stream. Now, what I'm doing right now, I'm actually recording this. That means that as you are watching me, Steven, as you're watching me, Tim Tokpe, as you're watching me, Abraham Olugudide, as you're watching me, I'm actually recording this as an audio, which means that when I finish this, I'm going to upload it. Temitokpe, Ogunkoya Temitokpe Felicia, I'm giving you a shout out right now. Stephen Akomu, I'm giving you a shout out right now. So as I'm doing this, I'm recording it live as an audio, which means I might possibly push this out in the next couple of days. Now, what I'm sharing with you here is 9 podcasting trends you should notice in 2017. And what I want to share with you, like I said, is inspired by a post written by Ramona Rise of podcastwebsites.com. And she is talking about the 9 different things that you will see as we enter into 2017. So, of course, hey, Linda, welcome to this broadcast. Thank you for joining me. Let me give you an audio shout out for that. Now, Linda, I know you're just joining me, but then what I'm doing right now, I'm actually recording this live on Facebook. That means I'm recording an audio while I'm also doing a live stream. So it's more of a combination of 2 of them together. Hey, Linda, you're laughing. Interesting. So, according to Ramona Rice, she says every year digital marketing experts try to determine trends to look for during the upcoming year. And this time around, we are not different. So we've taken a look at some of the things that have emerged in 2016 and we continue to thrive in 2017. So in this post, we are actually looking at 9 different things that are kind of the trends that you will need to pay attention to in 2017. And while there are a lot of them, hey, Samuel Adeoye, welcome to this live stream. Like I did for Linda when she came in, let me welcome you with, hey, this is for you, Samuel. So welcome back. Now, the first thing I would like you to notice, according to Ramona Rice, he says there's still plenty of room for podcast audiences to grow. That is, in 2017, podcast audiences will grow. Now, Linda is laughing a lot. That's quite interesting. Now, there's been a lot of conversation surrounding the need to develop audiences for podcasters. There is evidence that each year there are significant increases in the number of individuals who are listening to podcasts. And according to Pew Research Center, the audience for podcasting continued to grow in 2016. Now, 23% of Americans between age 12, or let's say starting from age 12, have listened to a podcast within the last 1 month. Now, this report is coming December 2016, and it says within the last 1 month, 23% of Americans from age 12 have listened to a podcast within the last 1 month. Now, considering the number of listeners, which was only 12% in 2013, now this is a significant increase. That is 3 years down the line, there has been another 12%. Like, podcast audience have doubled between 2013 and 2016. So, as I was saying, the growth in smartphone technology, especially even around here in Nigeria, you see that a lot of people have come to embrace smartphones, and we have things like Android, Infinix. What's the difference between Android and Infinix, by the way? So, there's been a lot of increase in smartphones around here, so that has also increased the number of people who listen to podcasts around here in Nigeria. Now, by reason of the increase in smartphones and people having access to audio on the go, the number of people who listen to podcasts have quite increased. 2 nights ago, while I was on a podcast coaching call with a client, she was telling me that she has found out that in the last couple of days, in the last couple of weeks actually, that she has turned her journey whenever she's driving, it has become more like a school, more like a classroom. So she's having more like a classroom while she's journeying. So while she's going from maybe, let's say, from Lekki to maybe mainland, she, with her mobile phone, she's connected to her car stereo, and with her phone she's actually playing an audio, playing something. And if you think of that, people who have maybe Android devices that can stream audio live, or people who somehow, this has actually helped a lot of people to have increase in podcast audience. Now, what does all of these, the increase of Android, the increase of smartphones, the increase in fact, right now I think, without any direct statistics, I think the market is more flooded by Android devices around here in Nigeria, which means that the listenership for podcasts is already increasing. That means that if you are yet to start a podcast, you should know that by 2017 you already have audience who are sitting down waiting to actually listen to what you have. So that makes it very, very interesting. So let me move on to the second thing, but before then, let's have a little music break.
Charming beat.
Okay, so welcome back. Now, what I've shared with you, how there's plenty room for podcast audiences to grow. Now, in 2017, podcast hosts are going to emerge as brand influencers. Now, a couple of weeks back, I think about 3 or 4 weeks, John Obidi interviewed a guy, a digital marketing expert named Kayode, on Smart Business Teleseminar. And while Kayode was speaking, and actually Kayode is a member of Nigeria Podcast Network, I've forgotten his second name, but his first name is Kayode, and he's a digital marketing expert. Now, when he was speaking on Smart Business Teleseminar, he kept mentioning podcast, and I think Stephen Akomo could hear that, because when I posted that, why is Kayode constantly mentioning podcasts, Stephen, you said that you could hear that as well. So that tells you that podcast hosts, and one of the things he actually said is that podcast hosts are going to emerge as brand influencers. Now, podcast websites written by Ramona Rice and Kayode, who is a Nigerian, are they saying the same thing? If they are saying the same thing, then that tells you that there's something about podcast hosts that you might want to pay attention to for the coming year. So please pay attention to that. Podcast hosts, people like you, people like myself, they're going to be emerging as brand influencers. Now, one thing that Kayode mentioned while he was speaking is that brands, businesses, and organizations are looking for people who are influencers of circles, of close circles, of communities where they have great influence. They are not looking for celebrity musicians, celebrity artists, celebrity comedians to actually use as the influencers for their marketing. They are looking for people who are actually everyday people who can influence certain number of people to buy into the product they have. And I am looking at podcast hosts as one of these brand influencers. So thank you, Kayode, for sharing that. Thank you, Ramona Rice, for also confirming what Kayode had told me or has said on Smart Business Teleseminar a couple of weeks back. Now, third thing that will also increase in 2017 is that there's going to be more monetization avenue open for podcasters from offering services. Okay, so number 3 point is monetization avenues open for podcasters from offering services. Now, this means that as more people decide to try podcasting, the number of services for podcasters continue to grow. Now, not only will Noah Bello, thank you for the hi. Stephen Akamus, thank you for the hi as well. Now, not only are individuals setting up podcast consulting companies, but entire podcast incubators are opening up to great success. Samuel Adeoye, thank you for joining as well. Now, these incubators or these incubation processes include coaching, mentorship, and a creation of community for podcasters looking to push forward. Now, that means that communities like what we have right now, Nigeria Podcast Network, is going to be one of those things that people are going to be looking out for in 2017. Somehow as a means to have coaching, as a means to have mentorship, as a means to have accountability, as a means to have ongoing support. Now, with that, there's also another trend that is being noticed, and that is where podcasters are getting to outsource parts or all of their production efforts. Now, this has been for quite a while, but it's going to really increase in the coming year, which means that people are going to be stepping into the podcast. People are going to be jumping into podcasts. People are going to be jumping into podcasting, and then they are going to come to the point where they are going to say that, okay, I don't want to do all of this podcast editing or podcast content distribution, podcast back end, all of that. They are going to be looking for to outsource them to people. So if you can, then you should tap into that for the coming year. And I think Cephar actually already offers that service. He offers podcast editing. Now, as a community, we are already working on coming up with something similar for members of this community, which means that you won't have to disturb yourself having to edit your podcast. You won't have to disturb yourself with having to work with the back end of your website. You won't have to disturb yourself about getting your podcast on iTunes. All of that is going to be handled for you. Now, the interesting thing is that you are going to get more information about that as we enter into the new year. But so far, there is work going on how you can get that. So if you are the type that you don't have a lot of time, you don't even have all of the energy to pour into editing, structuring your show notes, putting together all of that, I really say that you should look forward to that service, which is going to come from the stables of Nigeria Podcast Network. Now, part of what we should be looking forward to creating, and I think, what's his name? Samuel Adeoye actually talked about that a couple of weeks back. I think a couple of days ago, he actually talked about the back end of interviewing people, of conducting podcast interviews. I think we should start looking forward to having a setup such that it helps people to establish this is the podcast host and this is the guest, and this person serves as the middleman between the podcast host and the guest. I think we should start to look forward to that within Nigeria Podcast Network. Maybe somebody can set up a system that will be able to take care of that for people like people who wouldn't have to experience their battery going off like Samuel Adeoye experienced a couple of days back. So moving on, number 4 trend that is going to become dominant in 2017 is that smartphones will become the dominant force for mobile buying. Now, according to what is written here, it says that mobile marketing has been the rage in marketing for several years now, but buying from mobile devices is set to grow to 65% of the American marketplace in 2017. That is according to eMarketer. Now, eMarketer.com published an article where they said that in 2017, there's going to be 65% increase of people who are buying things using their mobile devices. Now, that means that, no. I mean, it's going to grow to 65%. In 2016, it is at 58%. That means right now it's at 58%, but then it's going to grow to 65%, which means that more people are going to buy stuff from their mobile devices, which means that if you have a mobile device like what I have right now, you can actually make payments. And if you know how you can structure your business, structure the things you do around people not necessarily having to go to their desktop, which also means that digital advertising is going to even be more to mobile phones in the coming year, in 2017, than to desktops, than to your PC. So if you know how to structure your business around people taking advantage of it right from their mobile devices, you are going to tap into a lot of what the market has to offer for 2017. So that said, let me play you a little music while I read the comments. Okay. Another trend you will need to pay attention to in 2017 is that live streaming will continue to grow. Now, live streaming has been growing since 2015 with the additions of Meerkat, Periscope, Blab. And I remember I was a big fan of Blab those days. I used to go on Blab and then just snoop around till I'm able to find something that fits what I do. Now, while still new, Facebook Live has entered into the mainstream live streaming feature, which means that most applications, most devices, most websites, most things are beginning to take advantage of Facebook Live right now, which means that if you're not taking advantage of Facebook Live yet, then you are behind. So you need to start taking advantage of Facebook Live, because in the coming year, 2017, Facebook Live is really going to grow. Now, if you remember that recently, Instagram also introduced Instagram Live. Before now, Instagram has had Instagram Stories, but they introduced something called Live recently, which means that you can actually do a live video that people can catch you while you are doing that. Now, the difference between story and live is that stories, Instagram Stories work such that you record something and then it goes out to the people who are following you, while live is that they can watch you while you are recording it. That's the difference. I have not tested it fully yet, but I believe a couple of us can actually take advantage of that. And Snapchat is also another growing streaming live stream app, live stream website that's already up, app so to say, that's available. So if you can take advantage of that. Now, what does all of this have in common? It means that as a podcaster, you can use live streaming to actually connect with your audience. If you have a Facebook page for your podcast, or you have a Facebook group, you can actually live stream your podcast while you are recording it. It's almost the same thing as what I'm doing right now. I'm actually doing a recording. As you can see me right now, I'm doing a recording and I'm still streaming it live. Now, by the time I sit down to edit, I'm going to cut off a couple of things there, or I might even decide not to edit anything out. I may decide to actually leave everything the way it is right now. But then the idea is that you can catch me while I'm doing the recording. It could also, by reading the comments, by taking questions while you are doing the live streaming, you can actually add more content to your episode. So you should take advantage of that in the coming year. So now, that said, another thing that you might want to pay attention to, which is another trend that is also rising, is customization of content is becoming more customized. Now, I'm going to read exactly what's here from podcast websites. So it says customization of content is becoming increasingly important in many aspects, in many respects. Now, not only because there are so many options for consumers to get content, but because businesses are trying to get to the particular niche they are looking to sell to. Now, that means that a trend, actually I saw this trend emerge with people like Frank Kane. He actually started something called audience segment, and particularly not just audience segment, he actually started with something like videos. There's a script that he created that when you watch a video, the video actually has your name as part of the text written inside the video. And there's a way he did it that I'm yet able to understand, but I've seen him tested it quite a number of times, and this is really, really interesting to me. So in 2017, that is going to become much more available. It's going to become, in fact, like I was saying, it's going to become much more particular to people, because they are going to be looking forward to, okay, you customizing the content you are creating to them particularly. So you need to be aware of that. So you need to email services like Aweber ConvertKit are making it easier to tag subscriber based on actions that they take on your website. I've seen that happen with ConvertKit, in that somebody told me, I received an email from Cliff Ravenscraft, and he said, choose of 1, 2, 3 the category that you belong, and if you can choose any of those categories, you are going to be receiving emails based on what you chose, which means that the emails you are going to be receiving is going to be customized to you specifically. So if ConvertKit has started doing that, Aweber has also started doing that. MailChimp has something called segmentation, which I have been using. I started using it, I think, middle of this year, when I was trying to check for how many people are really reading my emails. And when I was doing that, I realized that when I segmented the email list, when I segmented my email list and sent an email to the segmented list, it actually had more opens than to the general list. So that's something that you need to start paying attention to. Audience segmentation is going to be very, very important in the coming year. So podcasts are going to start to organize and niche and creating niches within themselves. So that is, many podcasters are experimenting with using seasons, taking one theme over the course of multiple shows. And let me read what it's here. Let me continue what's here. It says many podcasters are experimenting with using seasons, taking one theme over the course of multiple shows. This niching within podcasts themselves allows for better discoverability because it goes with the trend of customization of content. Podcasters who can figure out how to successfully organize their content into chapters or seasons are going to be leading this trend. Interesting. Now, okay, let me take a little pause here. Linda, okay, Noah Bello says, so you are recording a podcast now. Wow, this is becoming more interesting. Yes, I'm actually recording a podcast as I am doing this. And yes, I'm actually doing this. Linda, you said we need to have a chat. I should start podcast, and looks like I've been jonesing. Actually, you wrote lol, but your lol is even making me lol here. It's making me laugh. Actually, that's very correct. You need to have started podcasting. If you have not started podcasting yet, I think you're late. Okay, before I went on that, I actually said something, and I just talked about something about segmentation and podcasts having seasons, having a theme, and having a niche, and having podcast chapters, having seasons. Now, I am starting a podcast in 2017, and particularly, I'm also going with this trend of having my podcast in the form of seasons. Now, what that means is that in 2017, I'm going to be starting a completely new podcast. Not like I'm going to shut down Audacity to Lead. Audacity to Lead is still going to be serving the audience it's been serving. But I'm starting a new podcast in the niche, in the field of coaching, in the field of life coaching particularly. So I'm going to be starting a new podcast in that field. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing that podcast in seasons, which means that I'm going to have season 1, I'm going to have season 2, I'm going to have season 1, episode 1, season 1, episode 2, and on like that. I'm doing that because it's very important for me to focus, to create focus, and to have that block of schedule. If not, I will not be able to function at optimal level that I always want to. So, that said, let me get to read the comments. So we should be able to call in during your live recording soon. Yes, I'm working on how to get calling feature into my live recording, because I really love to have live recording, because actually the break, I was about to reveal the name. The name of the podcast is actually Break the Frame. So the Break the Frame podcast is more of live interaction. You are going to see, first off, you are going to see me or you are going to hear me and a guest. We are going to talk for maybe 5 minutes. Then we are going to get into a coaching demonstration session where you are going to be listening or watching how the coach actually coaches somebody. You are going to be seeing somebody being coached live and direct. So, and after that, we are going to discuss what happened within that session. So, it's more an on-the-spot kind of recording that you are going to be able to watch live, or you will be able to watch the recording. It all depends. Plans are still in place for that. So I'm getting back to the topic we are discussing, which is 9 podcast trends to look out for in the next year, which is 2017. So the last thing I said before going on that break was that audio segmentation isn't just for emails. Podcasts themselves are starting to organize a niche within themselves. Many podcasters are experimenting with using seasons, taking one theme over the course of multiple shows. This niching within podcasts themselves allows for better discoverability because it goes with the trend of customization of content. Now, podcasters who can figure out how to successfully organize their content into chapters or seasons are going to be leading this trend. That was the last thing I said before going on that break. Now that I'm back, let me continue with the next thing, with the next trend. So the next trend, which is number 8, which is actually not number 8, number 7. So number 7 trend you need to be aware of in 2017. Number 7 podcast trend you need to be aware of in 2017 is that native advertising will continue to grow. If you actually can remember the section about podcasts becoming brand influencers, can you? Now that means that through podcasts, native advertising is going to creep into audio. Now, native advertising is when the advert matches closely to the platform from where it's being offered. Now, I've shared this within the Nigeria podcast community before, that podcasts, I've shared this within Nigeria podcast community before, within Nigeria podcast network before, that one of the ways to monetize a podcast, because that's one of the top three questions I get almost every time, where I talked about how to monetize podcast platform. That is, you can monetize the platform, you can monetize the content that's part of the platform, and you can monetize the back end. Now, what I've started teaching my clients, people who are on the 6-figure podcast program, is something about having something at the back end of your podcast, so that your podcast is not just your podcast. Now, native advertising is when the advert that is being placed on that particular podcast is matching the podcast itself. And this is how it means. For podcasts, this means that the host will be reading the ad as part of the show rather than breaking for an advert break. Instead of things like, I know you must have heard something like, let's go on a short break. You must have heard that on a podcast episode. Now, instead of doing that, native advertising is when the podcast host picks the advert and then it just slots it in a very, very natural way that you are not even sure you are listening to an advert. It's until they actually pitch something that you get to know that, oh, was that an advert? Interesting. So that's one thing that's going to be on the increase in 2017, and you need to be able to learn how to do that to be able to take advantage of that. Next trend that you need to be aware of in 2017 is that storytelling, as important as it is actually here to stay. Now, 2015 was described as the year of the storytelling podcast. You will have noticed a lot of podcasts that came up suddenly like that. They came up and they were more of telling stories, more of podcasts where stories were being told, where people could hear stories from story to story to story to story. Podcasts like ESPN's kind of podcasts from startup, podcasts from This American Life, podcasts like, in fact, GE, that is General Electric, actually started a podcast in 2016, this year, and one of the things they did with their podcast was to tell a story that wasn't related to car, and in the process, they had to bring in. Remember, I talked about native advertising earlier on. That is, in the last point I actually shared was native advertising. They were able to do that in a very clever way. That they were telling story and they were using their product as part of the storytelling processes. So that is going to be on the increase in 2017. In the comments here, it says, I have noticed that a lot of native advertising on Stitcher Radio. Yes. Native advertising has actually come to stay. And storytelling is going to be one of the ways through which that is going to be driven. So in 2017, look out for how you can bring storytelling into your podcast and how you can bring adverts in such a way that they are natural to your listeners. And the next point, which is going to be the last, actually the number 9 points that I'm going to be sharing with you here for this particular episode, for this particular live stream, is that binge watching and binge listening will help podcasts so long as podcasters create binge opportunities. Now, strange things, actually this is kind of interesting, because if you have a lot of episodes in your vault, people are going to listen. Like, they are going to listen to episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4, episode 5, episode 6. They are just going to binge listen at once like that. So this is going to really be something that's going to be really valuable for podcasters in the coming year. And this is what you should really take advantage of. Okay. Gmos says I should shed more light on that. Now, by shedding more light, I believe you are saying that you shed more light on what binge watching means. Okay, how can I explain it to you? Okay, this is how I'm going to explain it. Now, in 2017, there's going to be, if podcasters can actually create the opportunities for their listeners to binge listen. Now, to binge listen or to binge watch something means that you actually sit down or you actually stay and then you listen to a lot of stuff at the same time. Let's say you listen to a couple of episodes at the same time. It's what people do with movies. If you have ever watched 24 Game of Thrones, if you ever watched any series movie before, and then you sat down, at the point where you sat down, you actually watched maybe like 4, 5, 6 episodes at once. That exactly is what binge watching is. Now, when it comes to podcasting, it means that when you have a couple of episodes, let's say like you have maybe 10, 20, 30 episodes, just like I have about 60, 70 episodes in my archive. If you sit down with, in 2017, people are going to come to that point where they're going to be creating playlists of podcast episodes, of podcasts and their podcast episodes. They're going to be creating playlists such that they are going to be listening to episodes around the same topic how should I explain it now? I believe how I'm explaining it is actually getting clearer. They are going to be listening to episodes like, listen to 5, 10, 20, 30 episodes at a stretch. So if you can actually do the work of creating multiple episodes and put them where people can listen. Like if you have a SoundCloud playlist of your podcast embedded on your website, that way people are going to listen, and they are going to really, really listen to all of those episodes at a stretch. So that is what binge listening is, if you understand that, Jimo. Mayowa, thank you. You said kudos. I love to see your new podcast equipment. If you have followed this so far, I believe you will have learned a couple of things from this particular episode, from this live stream. And like I said, the live stream is going to really, really pop up more in 2017. Like you can see right now, I'm actually doing this live. I'm recording a podcast episode while I'm also streaming it on Facebook. So this is going to be plenty in 2017. This is where I'm going to be ending this particular episode. And thank you, really, thank you for joining me on this live stream. I believe you have learned a couple of things, and I believe you have actually seen a couple of things. I'm going to go ahead and upload this video to YouTube. I'm going to upload this podcast also to my website as the final podcast for 2017. So just before I jump off, let me give a shout out to all of you who joined me live while I'm doing this. Jimo, Victor Bassi, Ada, John Meshe, Noah Bello, Akamu Steven, Mayowa Jishafe. Let me jump to the site. Let me jump to my laptop to read your names from my laptop. Samuel Adeoye. All of you, I want to say thank you to you. Thank you for joining. And for all the other persons who are going to be watching after this has been recorded, after this has been completed, and those of you are going to be listening to, and to you who will be listening to this podcast episode, thank you for joining me again. It's been quite interesting. So once again, let's leave with the sound. Yes, coming to you live from NPN. Okay, yeah. This is it.